Give me just a moment here. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and get rolling. I want to thank you for being here today. I know you're just clamoring to learn more about the Brown Act because you don't have enough on your plates with trying to launch spring semester and everything else that goes with it. But this is a good opportunity for that. I considered calling this workshop Welcome to Never Never Land, where we will never know what we're doing. But I thought that seemed kind of negative, so I went with a more positive thing. Anyway, I appreciate you being here, and I guess I should take a moment to tell you who I am. So I teach law at LACD College in our ABA paralegal program and also in our Pathway to Law School program. Prior to being a faculty member, which started about 7 years ago now, I was the general counsel for the college district. So when I was general counsel for the college district, because the college district has more than 150 bodies that are required to comply with the Brown Act, I gave Brown Act advice daily. I mean, not at least daily. And so I have a lot of background in this area. Of course, since the pandemic arose, since I've become a faculty member, and so this is, some of this stuff is new stuff for me too. But some of the guiding principles of the Brown Act remain the same. So that's just a little bit about my background. I am presently the secretary to the LACC Academic Senate. And so Mickey Hong and I work together closely on trying to make sure the Brown Act needs are met for LA City College. Thank you, Mickey, for coming on camera. And of course, for asking me to be Senate Secretary, right? Be careful what you wish for in this life. I recognize that some of you are people I've known for a long time. Some of you are people I haven't seen in a long time. Some of you are people I don't know at all. And it's all good because we're all here to try to evolve together. And certainly if there's one message that carries us forward from the pandemic is need to learn to adapt. So this is about learning to adapt to a new thing. Lourdes is going to post the slides so that you can have them. And also there's a separate handout with the scenarios. Now the scenarios are on the slides, but I wanted you to have the scenarios in a separate handout so that you can use them during the breakout sessions. What we're going to do is we're going to talk a little theory, and then we'll do quickie breakout sessions randomly assigned to try applying what we just talked about. And so you'll want to make sure that you've downloaded or opened those scenarios for that portion of things. So my format is generally a little theory, a little practice, a little theory, a little practice, which is the same way I teach my classes. I'd like to say that just like you, I've learned to face a screen full of black boxes, but I also enjoy seeing your faces. And so if you are in a position to have your camera on, that would be great. If you're not in a position to have your camera on, you know, no harm, no foul. I'm just saying it's nice to see folks. It's nice to talk to people. Yes, I see somebody has cleverly brought her lunch. I guess this is sort of a brown bag without us all being in the same room. So all is well. Okay, so let me go ahead and get started here with my slides. Just slideshow from beginning. All right. So the first thing I have to tell you is this is not legal advice. I did used to give legal advice to the district. I did used to give legal advice on the Brown Act, which is my expertise for presenting this session. But the final word on what legal advice is for the district is from the Office of General Counsel. And so please understand that I'm trying to provide you with tools and information, but to the extent that any memos or other guidance comes out from the Office of General Counsel, that should always take priority over anything I say here. My plan for today is to just do a quick refresher of the Brown Act. I am assuming that you all speak minimal Brown Act, that you just like you can go in a restaurant and order quesadillas, you can probably handle some basic Brown Act. So I'm starting at an intermediate level. This is not intended to be the introduction to the Brown Act that I've done so many times. We're going to talk about the old system and why, and I'm using the term traditional, the traditional Brown Act, meaning the system that existed pre-pandemic, because it is still available to us. So it is one of our options. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the new options and the requirements that go with them. In talking about that, I want you to know that you may choose the traditional Brown Act model, or you may choose the new options model, but you cannot choose from their requirements. So you really must either follow the rules for the traditional Brown Act meetings, or you must follow the new ones. But you don't want to say, well, I don't want to comply with that part, so I'll follow this rule. Well, no, don't do that. And then we're going to talk a little bit about documents, only because we're an academic institution and we generate lots of documents and reports and materials, and people ought to be able to see those. So we'll talk about that a little bit. My goal here is that you will understand what the parameters are that will exist after the 1st of March. One of the reasons the timing is because we've been in the official state of emergency, essentially, and we were told, as you probably know, that the state of emergency expires at the end of February. And that could be subject to change, but assuming that it does not change, then we're going to have to comply. And also that you can say what works best for your group. You know, the people that are attending today may be Senate presidents, but they may be committee chairs, and each one of you has a different group with different needs and different bodies. So if your Senate follows one set of rules, it may be that a different set of rules applies better for your committee. And I want you to be able to know what it is that's required and make it work. Okay, and Lords, if there are, I'm going to have a little trouble. How is that going to be made public? Should agendas indicate which modality the Brown Act applies to a committee? That's a good question, and the answer is, although that doesn't require it, it wouldn't be a bad idea to specify what code section that you're intending to follow. And and if you want to know how to find the right code section, you can go to leginfo.legislature.ca.gov, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But maybe remind me to come back to that. So let's just start with a quick refresher. The fundamental principles of the Brown Act, all right, is that there's some business that is the business of the public, and that the public is entitled to know about that. So first and foremost, that members of the public can know that there is a meeting. And I'm a little reluctant to point back to a meeting of 3 city council members that was published in the recent months, but that was a minority of the city council. And so it didn't fall within the public meeting law, but it's an example of why the public has an interest in what's being discussed in meetings. And so if the public doesn't know there's a meeting, the public can't participate. The public's entitled to watch the decision-making process. And in observing the decision-making process, that means that they can hear the debate. Now, there are some specific exceptions for individual contacts, but for the most part, the idea is that the decision is made not back in a room with the secret deal, but in fact in front of the public. And also that the public has an opportunity to tell their decision makers what they think. So those 3 principles really have everything to do with, complying with all of the elements of the Brown Act. And if you keep those in mind, I think it becomes easier to follow what's required. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, find yourself buried in the weeds of requirements, the smart thing to do might be to back up and say, okay, wait, what's the underlying value system that goes with this? So you have some specific requirements. You need to adopt a calendar. And for example, at LACD College Senate, we meet on the 1st and 3rd Thursdays of the month during the regular academic semester. For those meetings, you must make sure that you have a publicly available agenda posted, and that the supporting documents are as available to the public as they are to the decision makers. So sometimes you'll post an agenda knowing something is coming, but you don't have the underlying reported documents yet, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that you can't do it. What it does mean, though, is that as soon as those documents are distributed to the members of the body, that they are also available contemporaneously to the public. You cannot just make a decision and then let somebody talk. You must let somebody talk before you make the decision. Otherwise, their participation is not meaningful. It is smart to have some time limits in place. There are some specific requirements about time limits in the new Brown Act options, but I'm not going to dive into those today, mostly because I think we need to worry more about the structural setup. And under no circumstances, no matter what you're following, you must make sure that the public is the know how somebody voted on something. And that doesn't necessarily mean contemporaneous in the sense that they should be able to see it in the moment, but what you also may have to record it in your minutes. You do need to record it in your minutes. Okay. So we're getting here to our first practice. This is a warm-up session, all right? And one of the things that I think is a common challenge that Senates face is they don't do a careful and robust practice of keeping track of who's in the room. They just go all in favor, aye, and that's all that anybody writes down. And that's really legally inadequate because you have to record everybody's vote. And so, you know, having a sign-in sheet, of course, matters, but you need to keep track of those votes and things like that. And in some ways, this is a conversation with my peers and as fellow Senate secretaries. This is one of the things that I wanted you to just take a few minutes to think about, because I'm not really sure that it's done all that diligently. And I would say one of the issues with the new Brown Act thing is there's going to be closer scrutiny in order to decide whether to continue to allow those options or not. And so you need to be paying attention to that issue. So what I want to do right now is put you into, hold on a minute. I want to put you in some random breakout rooms, and I want to give you just 5 minutes ish to say 7 minutes, mostly because you'll have to take a moment to actually say, hi, this is my name. Put you in those breakout rooms, give you 7 minutes to talk about it a little bit, come back, and anybody share any ideas or suggestions that they'd like to share. Because one of the things I like the most about Senate things is that it's very collaborative. So we're going to, because there are over 30 people, we're going to put you in 10 breakout rooms, and I'm going to give you 7 minutes, and then we'll come back. Whoops. Sorry, I almost gave you 170 minutes, which I didn't want to do. Okay. All right. Everybody ready? Yes? Okay. Here we go. Zoom recording. There we go. Okay. So welcome, everybody. Welcome back. I hope that was an illuminating time. There's a moment where you go, how am I going to keep track of that? Do I really pay attention to those things? Yeah. And if you've been to a board meeting, my sympathies. If you've been to a board meeting and you wonder why there's all that staff, now you probably have an idea, because there's a lot to keep track of. I do not hold the record for board meeting attendance. That is held by someone else, but I want to tell you 400 closed sessions is about 300 more than most people would want to do. So just saying. Okay, so does anybody want to share thoughts that you had, ideas that you had while you were in your conversations?
I want to say what.
Virgil?
Just want to say ask one question. Maybe I misunderstood what this meeting is about, but I came in to find out exactly what we are supposed to be doing and what we may be doing this wrong. So I can make sure that this coming semester, for example, when we hold a work environment committee, I know what we should be doing. And so, and it doesn't seem like that's what we're getting.
So
I'm not quite sure.
This meeting is focused on new developments in the Brown Act. Mm-hmm. The Work Environment Committee is not subject to the Brown Act.
We're not. Okay. So what committee on campus are subject to the Brown Act?
Any Senate committee, any committee that reports up to the Senate, okay, and any committee that goes to the ASG, the Citizens Oversight Committee. Think those that go to the college shared governance body typically are not Brown Act required. And this isn't intended to be a rudimentary introduction to the Brown Act anyway. I think there may be a video posted on the VRC. We're starting at this level of what do we do about the interactive. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm interested in, because we're in Zoom right now. And again, the WEC is a committee of the Senate. So we report upward too. Well, we do report to, so it's not.
Well, you may report at the Senate, but you may report at the Senate, but the WEC is really not a Brown Act body.
Okay. What about the college? What about the College Council?
No, it's not either.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, Margarita. We're having trouble hearing you.
Margarita, maybe if you get closer to the mic.
She also may
Hello,
have
can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, we discussed the roll call. I mean, how do we keep track or not? The roll call vote would be the way to ensure that everybody was present or not, and whether.
And- Agreed,
yeah,
agreed, but that may not be all that viable if your body, if you have 20 or 30 people, I'm not sure a roll call vote is
That's-
viable, and so you may
That
have
is
to
what
have-
we discussed. Yeah, exactly. Like when you have a large Senate, it's really horrible to go roll call for everything to ensure that, and that's why we resort to the unanimous consent or acclamation or things like that. But
even then you need to keep track of who's present, because
yeah.
yes, it is. So when you're meeting in person, you need to have a way of how you do that, okay? And when you're meeting on Zoom in the traditional Brown Act, you must do a roll call. It's not optional under the traditional Brown Act if you're meeting on Zoom. And if you're meeting in the new Brown Act option, you have to report to the public what everybody's vote was. So one approach is to do a poll and include it in the minutes. You've then reported it to the public. Another approach is to do it in the chat, but when you have a large group of people, even that's quite cumbersome, because suddenly you have 30 entries and you haven't been clear about when voting is open and closed. And so you start running into people voting yes after the vote is over, and it's difficult to manage. Edgar.
I had a question regarding, well, I think to keep track of the attendance, we use our one of our classified as a curriculum specialist to keep track of who comes in and out of the Zoom as attendance, and then report it on the minutes as to who was absent and who was present.
You can do that, although there is also there's also a Zoom tool.
Right.
The Zoom tool for reporting provides you with who attended, but that's not the same as reporting who was present at the time of a particular vote, right? So people come late, you've already voted on the minutes. You can't, just because they were there doesn't mean they voted on the minutes, because they didn't get there until 10 minutes late.
So do
That's
they
something
have to
keep in mind.
Right, and so then I guess the question then is, does every vote have to have a roll call on the minutes?
In the traditional Brown Act, the answer is you must include in the minutes everybody's vote for every vote. Okay.
Okay.
How you get that done can be different. If you're doing remote attendance under the traditional Brown Act, you must do a roll call. If you're doing it under other systems, then you can find something else that allows you to accurately record everybody's vote. It will not do to just say, well, once they've signed in, they're here, because people also leave early, right? So logistically, this is going to work out differently from one group to another.
And I guess, can I have a question then?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Can you group things together then in terms of voting? So you can, let's say, discuss all the items and then vote once for all of them?
You can create a mechanism in your agendas for what's called a consent calendar, where you take one vote. If you create that kind of mechanism, you should also have a mechanism for taking something out of the consent calendar. So say you have 5 different things, you're pretty sure everybody's going to vote yes, and it's fine, you put it on the consent calendar, it's fairly routine. But if there's somebody who's going to object, you might want to allow that any member of the body can take something out of the consent calendar so that they don't have to vote no on the whole consent calendar, right? Okay.
Thank you.
Sure, Adriana.
There we go. We talked about how do we publicly announce the committee meetings? Can we use social media? Can we use the website?
You must post on the website, okay? Now, for a committee meeting, you don't have to go all the way to board docs. And that was one of the questions that was, Lords alerted me to. Board docs is legally sufficient, okay? And so one option is to post all of your committee meetings on board docs. That is one option. It is not necessarily legally necessary to do that, but you need to make it public. So I know that at a couple of the committees at LACC use the campus calendar that's posted on the website, so that it is public. The calendar is available to the public, and that would probably be, for a committee, would be legally sufficient. You don't want to do that for anything that's, I mean, you want to put your Senate stuff, your whole Senate body stuff on board docs for sure. Chad?
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I just had a quick question. Maybe I misread the email, but my understanding of one thing that might be covered here is alternative ways to attend these meetings as perhaps the Brown Act is evolving. And so with the understanding of, I mean, we've actually, my understanding from a couple of committees is that attendance has been outstanding since there have been dual ways of attending. So I was wondering, you know, if a couple of the ways of attending, in addition to physical presence, has been that you can put a note on your office door or even your household door or apartment door saying a person of this committee is in attendance and you're welcome in to attend as a member of the public if you would like to attend through my office or I guess home dwelling. So I thought that was interesting, and this was something that was I was made privy of in the past, and so I thought maybe these were some alternative ways in case something came up where one couldn't physically attend. And so I'm wondering if I misread something with today's meeting that would be talking about these alternative ways to be present and to be consistent and in compliance with the Brown Act, and maybe an evolving Brown Act, or if this is just we're learning about the Brown Act as it is as a standard practice and nothing's really changing at all.
Great segue question. Thank you so much. Our next set of conversation here is going to be about how the traditional Brown Act allows for remote attendance, which is a mechanism that you may elect to pursue. So let me move to that here.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. All right. So the traditional Brown Act, meaning the thing that existed before the pandemic, is still available to us. And so here are some of the expectations that happen. So even before the pandemic, somebody could attend remotely as long as a majority of the body was present within the jurisdiction. So, and the jurisdiction is the LA Community College District. Legally, it's the whole district. So in theory, you could have had somebody sitting at Valley College and somebody sitting at City College and somebody sitting at another site within the district and still be in complete compliance. But you need to specify each and every location on the posted agenda. So you can't do it as a last minute thing. The traditional Brown Act does not deal with last minute at all, because the traditional Brown Act requires that every site is available to the public, every site is published ahead of time, and a member of the public can see and hear everything you can see and hear, and every vote is by roll call. So when you're dealing with and you can do this, all right, you can absolutely specify that one person will be attending from, assuming you're following this particular authorized pattern, one person will be attending from the law department, and that is in Holmes Hall 200, and one person will be attending from another location, and that will, but in each and every place, the public must be able to basically walk in without identifying themselves, record what's going on, okay? And so this originally arose when people like would get sick or something and they wanted to attend from home. If you haven't published in advance, you may not do it, okay, using this particular pattern. And if you do publish in advance, you must make sure that essentially any member of the public is able to participate this in essentially this almost the same way. So you can't sit in your office with earbuds in, for example, under this mechanism. So you may use this mechanism now, or you can use this mechanism unless somebody changes the law. This is available to you, and there may be value in that. For example, I can imagine that a committee that is of the District Academic Senate might well have different campuses who don't want to drive, but they still want to be able, they don't want to drive, but you still want to have it. You can still do that. You just have to say, you have to be prepared to publish the specific address or location. And when I say specific address, it doesn't mean you can just post the campus address, right? You have to, our campuses, our smallest campus is 22 acres. You have to be, somebody has to know really where they're going, all right? So those are the basic parameters for what we call the traditional Brown Act. And some people may decide, like I said, I can see why a committee of the District Academic Senate might find that very useful. But if it's a campus-based thing, in theory, you want to sit in, one person sits in the nursing department and one person wants to sit in the business department. In theory, you can do that, but you need to make sure that members of the public can attend. If your office has no room for an additional person, then you really shouldn't do that. It has to be publicly accessible. So now I have another opportunity for you to practice. And in this particular one, we're assuming you're set up under the traditional Brown Act, and one of the committee members says she's tested for positive for COVID and wants to attend by Zoom from home. The first question is, if you've already posted a Zoom link, can she attend? You don't have a Zoom link posted on your regular agenda, may she attend? And then the third question is, if somebody is a resource person. So the question is, can somebody who's a Senate the Senate committee member attend by Zoom as long as you've posted it publicly from her home? So that's those are your practice hypotheticals. Before we go jumping back into those breakout rooms, does anybody have any questions? No guts, no glory.
I was going to ask if we can get the answers.
Will you find it helpful to have the answers before you have your discussion?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm game. It's not, I'm not trying to exercise academic rigor here. Hang on a minute here. I had a technical moment. There we go. All right, well, so let me share this with you. So if you've posted a Zoom link for the public observation and may she attend, the answer is she may attend, but she may not speak, she may not vote, she may not communicate with other members, All right. So there is a provision in the traditional Brown Act that says you have a committee meeting and somebody else wants to attend, they can attend, but they're not allowed to participate from the dais. And so she can observe, but she may not speak, participate, communicate. So one of the things that you should make sure you do is have limit the ability to communicate, because if she's sending private messages to other members of the Senate during that meeting, you're gonna cross over a line. The second one is you do not have a Zoom link posted on your regular agenda, and the answer is just no, right? You've given nobody the ability to do that. By the way, I just want to tell you my answer on 2A is a little bit nuanced. Some people might say she shouldn't attend at all. That's a little bit more conservative than I think it needs to be. And then the third question, the person attending is making a presentation, and that is perfectly fine. There is nothing wrong with somebody who is not a voting member of the body appearing remotely, even if your meeting is in person. So if your meeting is in person and you have nobody attending remote, you have no Zoom link posted, but somebody needs to Zoom in, for example, let's just say that Angela, as the president of the DAS, wanted to appear at a Senate meeting to speak briefly to the local Senate, but wanted to do it by Zoom. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. People can make remote appearances as long as it's not a voting member of the body. I'm seeing things in the chat, so I'm just trying to make sure that it's okay. You want to have a little discussion about that?
This is Chad Snow again, just to follow up with what I mentioned earlier. Am I heard?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, just so it sounds to me, and unless I'm misunderstanding, that the traditional Brown Act is pretty much still in place. I believe Zoom existed even before the pandemic. So it sounds like we're just learning about alternative ways that have always been available or have been available for many years, but that there hasn't been any kind of real revision to the Brown Act and no new alternatives post COVID-19.
No, that's not true.
Oh,
So during the pandemic, there were emergency findings that allowed for a suspension of some of the Brown Act requirements. And in our my next topic will be the discussion of the new alternatives and the requirements that go with them. So this particular set of parameters was one that honestly was mostly dismissed by Senates because even though Zoom predates the Brown Act, he just didn't have people using that a lot, because if they wanted to attend, they wanted to attend remotely, and they didn't want to post their home addresses and make their homes available to the public. And so people went, I'm not doing it. That said, I had quite a few times, well, not quite a few, but I had a number of times where a member of the board, a majority of the board was present, but a member of the board was in a conference or on vacation in Hawaii or New York. And they would post, the address of the Waldorf Astoria, and they would put their, I gave them instructions. I don't know whether they complied, but they were supposed to put the agenda on their hotel room door, and at the time of the meeting, open their hotel room door and let members of the public come in if they were so inclined. I take it, I couldn't police that. I just told them what was required. Because for a lot of people, they weren't vigorous users of things like Zoom, and prior to the pandemic, it just became a little bit more, apparent about the ability to use the some kinds of remote technology. I mean, GoToMeeting existed before Zoom, I believe. So the answer is those systems are available to you and continue to be available to you. So if you want to have remote attendance, I'm giving you some ideas about how you can use it in ways that maybe you didn't think of before. So, and also, by the way, speaking of the district, I was already at City College teaching, but there was a trustee who was attending the board meetings consistently on a remote basis due to medical conditions, as I understand it. And that would be allowed. Okay, sure. All right, maybe, does anybody else have any other questions about this one, or shall I go on to our whole new world options?
Camille?
Yeah.
I have a question for you. I teach part-time at a private college, and I inquired about attending a Senate meeting just because I was highly involved here at East, attending them when I was chair. And then I was informed that we weren't invited. And so I got a little bit agitated because I wanted to see if we can get some support for our adjuncts at this private college. And so do all Senate meetings required to follow the Brown Act, or is this just based on public institutions?
Yeah, the Brown Act is public bodies. Okay, so the Brown Act is going to apply to the City Council, the County Board of Supervisors, the Water District, the Air Quality Management District, anything that's a governmental kind of agency, all right, or anything that's created by a governmental agency. So there are a lot of private institutions that don't have these requirements at all. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Sure. You know, you can engage with them about the need for transparency. That's a different that's a policy discussion, not the Brown Act discussion. By the way, on the state level, a state agency has to comply with something that's like the Brown Act. It's called Bagley-Keene, and it's the same idea, but it's for state agencies, not for local agencies, which is what our focus is. Okay, so our brand new world. Okay, we can allow for remote participation without posting in advance if we meet a set of base requirements. Now, there is nowhere in the law that it says base requirements. It doesn't say that. That is the Camille Goulet term for what has to be in place in order for you to do this. One of the things is, like, the new option allows for attending on an emergency basis. Well, you can't do that unless you have these items in place, all right? So you have to have a place where the quorum is present, all right? There has to be a place where the quorum is present. And then you also have to enable the public to participate both at that location and remotely, all right? If something hits a glitch, and goodness knows with technology, it often does, you're not allowed to take any actions until that's restored. The language of the law says not allowed to take any actions, which in theory doesn't mean you have to interrupt your whole meeting. You can just not take any votes, but I wouldn't necessarily push the outside envelope of that if I were you. It says actions. In theory, action is a vote. But if you're having an extensive discussion about something, I wouldn't go there. I guess is what I'm trying to say. Just be a little careful about that. And then there's a limitation, okay, on how a member can participate remotely, which is that it has to be by audio and video. That doesn't have to be Zoom. You can use a different platform. Certainly Zoom is the one with which we're most familiar. You'll notice that this is set to expire in 2025. And one of the reasons is because, first of all, the pandemic's in flux. But secondly, it's an experiment, right? And there are lots of people who are already suspicious of secret meetings and shenanigans, as it is, to use the technical term. And so these basic things need to be in place before you allow anybody to attend remotely under the new option. So you have the traditional Brown Act. We talked about that. You can follow those parameters. That means you've posted the agenda item in advance, right? You've posted the addresses of all locations in advance. If you want to allow for this remote attendance, then you have to make sure that you have these things in place before you do that. All right. And so it allows for something called just cause. All right. You only get twice a year to do this. Right. So there are emergencies and there's just cause. Emergencies, put that over the side just for a second. All right. We're on just cause, meaning, okay, I have a reason why I can't be there in person. And when I can't be there in person, this is my basis. Most of the time, all right, a just cause is going to be something that may be, that would be known ahead of time, all right? So a just cause situation can involve a contagious illness, like testing positive for COVID, right? So if you call that or any contagious illness, really, a physical or mental disability, but there's a maximum of 2 times. When somebody appears by just cause, then they actually have to say who else is in the room with them that's an adult, all right, and who those people are. For example, if I were attending and I had, because I had COVID and my, spouse was there, I would have to say my spouse is here, okay? And so basically the public is entitled to know who else is in the room. You still have to meet all those other requirements, okay? So if you don't have that stuff set up ahead of time, you can't do it. Now, just to give you, now I have the other possibility is what they call emergency attendance, all right? And an emergency means basically a medical emergency, all right? If it's been posted ahead, if it hasn't been posted ahead of time, all right, then you have to make an emergency finding as part of allowing somebody to do that. So whether you're doing just cause or emergency, you basically have to include in your Senate agenda a particular finding that allows for these things to occur. In other words, during the regular pandemic time, good grief, we had those routine resolutions that said we find there's a pandemic and we shouldn't meet in person, and therefore we find that there's a basis for meeting remotely. This would be the same kind of routine finding. Camille has tested positive for COVID. Now, you cannot make people reveal their entire medical condition, okay, because they have a right of privacy in it. So they're not required to waive all their privacy in order to invoke this, but they should be able to provide some level of statement that they're having a condition, okay? And so I've provided you with an example of what a chair of a committee or a Senate president might say if you have something that comes up where you haven't posted it and they want to attend. This is kind of the language that, and you could use different language, but this is the language that I'd recommend to make the appropriate finding. And one of the reasons is that an emergency finding for this requires a majority vote. Most of the time, in order to make an emergency finding, it requires a 2/3 vote. But there's a specific allowance for letting this be a majority vote for this purpose. And so this is kind of the suggestion about how you might go about it. But remember, whether you want to use the new option emergency or the new option just cause, if you don't have all that other public stuff set up, you cannot, should not, must not allow somebody to attend remotely, even when it comes up at the last minute, as a member of, as a voting member and a participant. Let me just take a quick look here. Okay. So,
Camille, you have a question in the chat asking, can we mix and match?
mix and match traditional Brown Act and the new options?
Presumably, Margarita, is that what you meant?
Nay,
Yes.
nay, nay.
Okay.
Don't do it. Okay. That's the, see, and this is exactly why people are, the argument against these new options was that people would mix and match and do what was convenient. And that's why I say it's important not just to comply with the law, right? But also because if we want to be able to be flexible and use technology moving forward, and there's all kinds of reasons why that's a good thing, that the public watchdogs, these things are watching to see, are we doing it, right? Are we complying? Because if we're not, that, you know, it will go away. I assure you. I mean, it's one of the reasons the original Brown Act ones were quite narrow. So I'm now going to make you go answer your own questions. I'm going to make you go do your own hypothetical this time. See if you can, hang on a minute here. And I'm going to send you off into a 7-minute breakout session. All right. Options, yes. Okay, have fun.
So this is what you just said, it's starting in February that we have to do it?
Starting in March. You have until the end of February to get yourself to
Meeting on location.
Yeah. Whoops. Previous. Okay. So who would like to share? Raise your hand and tell us what your answers are here.
I think my group got, I'm so sorry. Go ahead, Margarita. You raised your hand first.
Oh, well, so question 3A, what needs to be done? We need to disclose, let me see. So this would be just cause, and we determined that before the meeting. Well, the new act does not require us to post the location of the meeting as long as there is quorum.
No, you always have to post the location of the meeting.
Oh, the remote meeting?
Not the remote meeting.
Oh, no. Yeah, of course. No, you know,
Right.
I'm talking
Right.
about exceptions.
Okay, go
That we
ahead.
don't need to disclose the remote location, but we need to have the quorum in
But you need to disclose, you need to post on the agenda that somebody is going to be attending.
Oh,
remotely.
okay.
And
Okay,
it
that's
needs
what
to
I mean.
include the agenda item that says, we make a finding of just cause for this person to attend remotely. So
We need to vote on that then?
yeah,
To the just cause? Ah, I thought only
Yes.
the emergencies.
yeah, no, you have to vote on the just cause also. But
Okay,
in the case of just cause, for the most part, you should know before the agenda posting.
yeah.
And so, when you're, for attending a conference, you always, ahead of time, right? So you have to post it as an agenda item
Okay.
for everybody to vote on and say, we permit so-and-so to attend remotely for just cause on the basis that she's at a conference.
Okay, so this is very good to clarify, because then just cause and emergencies need an action item.
Yeah,
on the
yeah,
agenda.
they do.
Okay.
It's just that the just cause ones are posted ahead of time for the most part.
Okay.
Yeah.
And 3B, we said no.
Yeah,
We cannot,
that's right.
we cannot allow the member to participate as a member. Of course, the person could join remotely, but without engaging with anybody on the body.
That's right. That's right. Miriam?
We had more like a question, because I think we were a little confused with the quorum. When the quorum meets in one place, it's a physical place. Am I correct?
That's right.
Okay, got it. That's all we had. We had a question. We were confused whether it was everybody meeting on the Zoom, and then if that's the case, we'll have to disclose everybody's location. But
No.
if the quorum meets in one place, physical place that is available to the public and published on the agenda, then we are fine. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Patricia?
I apologize if this has been answered before. On the new Brown Act, the singular physical location, is that a room on campus, or because it says you have to participate in person from a singular physical location?
Right.
So does that mean we all have to physically, bodily be present in the same physical room? Or could you consider, for example, the campus of your college to be the singular physical location and you are attending in person from your individual offices, as long as those offices have doors open and people can come in?
If I were still representing the district, I wouldn't want to stand up in front of a judge and say that with a straight face.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, just saying. Ask yourself, okay, if the judge is looking down at you on high asking you that, right? Or if they run it on the news as, how your college gets around the public meeting law. Right?
No, that's why I wanted to ask, because again, we're all staring down the barrel of people not coming to these meetings anymore and dropping out of committees because they don't want to physically come to a meeting. So how do we get quorum? How do we ensure that we have quorum for every single one of our meetings under the new Brown Act? It's going to be hard.
Well, and so the option that they should have, if they're not going to come physically to the meeting, is to be prepared to post the publicly available location where they're going to be.
Right. So stick with the original Coke, not the new Coke.
Certainly one way of looking at it. Anyway, all right. Now let me see if
I have a question.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Based on what you just said, so that was a work, maybe that's the wrong term, but a workaround, meaning if you disclose where you are, then you can participate remotely if we don't, even if we don't have a quorum?
The traditional Brown Act, okay, allows you to poll. You still have you got to have a majority in the same place. All right. As far as I'm concerned, that means the same room. You got to have no matter what. All right. If you want to follow the traditional Brown Act, you can allow somebody to participate remotely if their address is posted ahead of time and publicly available. If you want to follow the new Brown Act, you got to make sure you basically are set up for broadcast, interactive broadcast, in order to make it work. It's kind of a bottom line. The answer is, at the end of the day, you need to come back.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we need to come back. And why? Because so the public can scrutinize what we're doing. Remember, the public, you might be thinking, well, I'm not sure the public wants to know the nuance of what's included in the new IT class, or gee, what's the difference in an e-discovery course versus a law practice management course? But there are members of the public that are members of our academic community. And frankly, if we don't comply with those public meeting laws, they can use that to undermine any progress you're trying to make on a curricular front for not, curricular academic front, trying to move something forward. If you haven't complied with the Brown Act, you might have a problem and have to go back and do it again. Patricia.
So I just wanted to clarify a couple things. The original Brown Act does not have any, you just said, look, the long and short of this, we have to come back. But there's nothing in the original Brown Act that says a quorum must participate from a singular physical location. Is that correct?
It says
again, I'm looking at faculty that my senators, I'm looking at committee members that are not physically, at least for the next little while, going to want to come back and be physically sharing space. But I don't think the Brown Act says that we have to be in a singular physical location, the original.
Honestly, I'd consider that indefensible. I would. Okay.
But not against the Brown Act. It's not against the law.
I think it's completely inconsistent with the spirit of the law, to be honest.
Oh yeah, I understand that. But again,
and I wouldn't, and I really would not consider that acceptable. But if you want to if you want to have everybody teleconference in and disclose everybody's location, I guess you could do that. Okay. I honestly not sure that passing the straight face test, but
I mean, I'll be on campus with my OWL camera, so they can join. Yeah, but I want to, again, for the next little while everybody's nervous, I want to make sure I have quorum so we can get the business of the Senate and our committees done.
Yes, well, you can always do what Mickey Hong has done and book the biggest room on campus.
Yep.
That way everybody can, sit there in a mask 6 feet apart. I honestly don't think that not putting everybody in the same room, I mean, the majority in the same room is ever going to be, will ever, pass muster again, unless we're in an emergency. But that's just my view. There are nuances to the Brown Act. If you have a majority, I mean, yes, technically, if you disclose every location and you have a majority that are sitting within the jurisdiction of the district, and every one of those locations is available to the public, could you pull it off? Yeah. Should you? No. That's my view. Okay. This is one of the great things about not being the legal counsel anymore. I can actually express my opinion rather than just tell you what the legal parameters are. Margarita, and then I need to move on.
Yeah, I just want to say that in addition to everything you just said, also a problem is the who ensures compliance with, how are we going to provide assurances to the public that yes, all those remote locations were actually available to the public, right?
That's right.
How, as if I am the chair of the committee, I don't want to be, I cannot take on that responsibility, and therefore it's very impractical. And not just to ensure that everybody is following the rules on those remote locations.
I agree. I just think it's so inconsistent with the spirit of the law. All right. What happens if we get a new surge? We can only go back to the remote only option if the state declares an emergency. It's not county based. All right. So the county may set parameters about where we have to wear masks and that sort of stuff, but the state decides whether we're having an emergency. So unless we got a new announcement of an emergency, and what do I know? It seems unlikely to me, but what do I know? All right. So documents have to be contemporaneously available. I've already said that. A lot of sometimes we have questions about, do we have to provide them in paper? And the answer is, you have to have a reasonable number, and it doesn't say this in the law, okay? But if you've only posted digitally and you have a member of the public attending in person, I'm not really sure you're being fair and reasonable in your disclosure if you don't have any copies of documents. That said, I don't think you need 100 or even 50. I think what you need is a reasonable number, and a reasonable number may well be 2, right? If you have a committee of 5 people, if as opposed to the Senate meeting, right? If you have a committee that's of 5 people and you've posted all the documents, and you want to have, you can have 2 spare copies available for the public, and that's perfectly fine. The reason I choose the word reasonable number of copies is to say it depends a lot on the size of the committee, and also on the history of public attendance. So as you probably know, the Board of Trustees could easily end up with 100 guests. We didn't make 100 copies of everything, but we had spare copies. But it was very common to have 25 to 50 guests. Most of the time, that's not going to be the case for a local Senate or a local committee. So, am I facing jail time? This is the question, all right? So understand that a knowing violation is a misdemeanor. In other words, if you're oblivious, okay, you probably haven't committed a misdemeanor. However, if you choose to be oblivious, I wouldn't necessarily think that would be a good choice. All right. So it's a little bit like the student who says, I missed the exam because I never looked at anything on Canvas. Well, don't you have a responsibility to look at what's going on Canvas? So when you're on these committees, and you have a responsibility to have a general understanding of what your responsibilities are. But the good news is, if you make a mistake and it's a good faith error, you just didn't get it, that's not going to be the end of the universe. But also, most of the time, unless you're really going off in a corner and having secret meetings, somebody is, for a closed session item 30 days, for an open session item 90 days, has to send you a notice that says, hey, you didn't do this legitimately. And then you get a chance to do a do-over. So they can't sue. So there are civil actions and there are criminal actions. Neither the district attorney's office nor a civil suit will normally happen or normally be available to happen unless somebody's given you notice and an opportunity to correct. All right. So most of the time, if you deliberately disregard the law, yes, you're looking at orange jumpsuit. Okay. And even if orange is your color, it's still not a good look, I'm telling you. But but it really, understand that you'll have this opportunity for this do-over. Okay. So I just want to say, before I take last questions, before we wrap up here and everything, I started out by saying I wasn't sure if I should call this Neverland. I have a feeling that with all of these parameters, you're still confused. For that, I apologize. But I want to say, if you feel like we're heading off into Neverland, you're not the only one. All right. The easiest thing to do, is actually just go back to having meetings in person. That's the easiest thing to do. Now, if you want to add a Zoom session so that the public has better access, that's great. I'm all for that. Anything that builds, transparency is going to be a good thing, and do that. Okay, that's perfectly fine, but do that as value added, not as a substitute for meeting in person. Think about it this way. Haven't you had a student, I'm sure you've all had a student who went through all kinds of machinations to cheat, or ask for an extension, or ask to submit something after the class was over, or whatever it was. And you probably said to yourself, if you put in the work to do the work instead of the work to get out of the work, you'd be better off, right? I'm confident that we all share this experience. And so we have to ask ourselves the question, couldn't we just, comply? So that's my message is truly, okay, we got to get back together. All right. And some way or another. And I know that we've been able to have all kinds of participation in the pandemic, but that's the way it will go. All right. Any final questions? Fears? Apprehensions? Okay. As we like to say, hearing none. Thank you all for being here today. I hope you found this helpful. I'm on the district email, so if you want to send me a question, feel free. I will repeat, the Office of General Counsel is the final authority on legal opinions. Okay. So thanks, everybody. And, have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Camille.
Thank
Bye.
you, Camille.
Thank you, Camille.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, I'm signing off.
Okay.